Γεια σας μαθητές, salvete discipuli. Welcome to this new series of videos that I'm starting on medical Greek and Latin. I have some students who learn Greek from me, so this will be of relevance to them. But I have some students who learn Latin, and in both sets of students, I have some who are interested in pursuing medicine. So this will appear in both of my channels so that I can reach both of my audiences. This is lesson 1, and it's going to focus on Greek prefixes, and I'm not going to do them all in this video. So this is Greek prefixes part 1, and this will be a long-running series, and eventually we'll cover almost all of the important bases and the contributions of Greek and Latin to medicine. Now, what I'm not going to do is give you a bunch of medical terms and their definitions. I'll present a few. The interested viewer will go to a dictionary, look some of these words up, because this isn't really about vocabulary, it's about the building blocks of the vocabulary. So let's start with a or an. And this, you'll see two flavors of it. The A goes before a consonant, most consonants, and the an goes before a vowel or an H. And it means not, without, lacking, or deficient. And we see a lot of this. It's a very popular construction. In Greek, this is called the alpha steritikon. In Latin, we call it the alpha privatium. And in English, it's called the alpha privative. And you might be thinking, there's no way we have anything like this in English, but we've got hundreds and hundreds of examples. So we have the word typical, and the opposite of that is atypical. There's your alpha privative. And in Greek, for those of you who are on the Greek side of my lessons, you have the word atypos. We have symmetric, and the opposite of something that's symmetric is asymmetric. And in Greek, it looks like this, asymmetrikos. Okay, so that alpha in front of the words typical and symmetric just means not typical, not symmetric. Symptomatic, a word that we all came to know very well throughout the pandemic, the opposite of which is asymptomatic, asymptomatikos. Hedonia, a word that many people probably don't know, it just means pleasure. Anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure. Anidonia. Okay, so you can see how that one little letter makes such a big difference. We have biotic and abiotic, aviotikos. Now, it's not always an A. Sometimes we have a word like this, inimicable and unbelievable. Believe it or not, these also come, they're just different flavors of that alpha privative. Okay, so when you think of all of your ins and uns and ands, there are many, many words that fall into this category. And I'm not going to do this for many other words, but you can see these blue letters here. The tip in typical, the tip in atypical directly correspond to the tip in atypos. So you can see where the Greek root is. All right, if I jump down a little bit to symptomatic, sim and ptoma, symptoma, and there it is in Greek, sim and ptoma. Okay, so a lot of these words are directly borrowing from Greek and from Latin, as we'll see later. Our next prefix is anti and anth. These are the same. We use anti before most consonants. We use anti with the letter I in a special way, which I'll show you in a moment. And we have ant with a vowel. Ant with a vowel or an H. And you might be wondering, well, why all these combinations? We do this in English as well. There are some times that we use the letter A as an article, like a boy or a toy, but we'll say an umbrella or an ice cream cone. Okay, so it's just something that's used to facilitate pronunciation. And anti, you may already know, is against or preventing or relieving. So we have biotic, antibiotic. Now, I'm not going to go into what biotic means. This is something for a later lesson. If you're looking at the word antibiotic, even if you don't know what biotic means, and if you don't know that bio means living or living organism or life, you should at least know that the anti tells you it's a prefix and it's the opposite of what the root bio is. And in Greek, look at this, antibiotikos, antibiotic, antibiotikos. Most of the letters are exactly the same. Antitoxin, even if you don't know what a toxin is. You know, anti is going to be the opposite of it. Anthemorrhagic, kind of a long word, maybe one you haven't seen very much before. You might know that hemo or hemorrhage has to do with bleeding, and the anth is used here instead of anti because we have an H at the beginning of that root. Many people probably have not heard of an analgesic because in modern English it's just become analgesic. Now, I haven't shown you an example yet with this anti plus I. This one is always hyphenated, so you'll get something like this, anti-inflammatory. Okay, so when you have anti and then the root begins with an I, we'll always insert a hyphen. All right, and now we have dis, D-Y-S, and it is very, very important to remember that this is not D-I-S, which is a different prefix. It's one that will come to us from Latin most of the time. Okay, this is D-Y-S, and it means difficult, defective, abnormal, painful. And we do get a Latin equivalent here. We get mal, mal, and you'll see an example in a moment. Although remember, this slideshow is about Greek medical prefixes. Latin ones will come up in later episodes. So let's take a word like trough, which means nourishment. Dystrophy. Well, some of us may have heard of muscular dystrophy, and we know that trough has to do with some kind of nourishment or nutrition. This is going to be the opposite of that, okay? It's something negative. And by the way, there's what it looks like in Greek, dystrophy. Dysfunction. And isn't it funny how English does this? We have dysfunction, D-Y-S, like that's a dysfunctional family. And when people were coining words in English and they ran out of combinations, they said, well, we've already used dis, so we can't use dysfunction again, so let's make malfunction. Okay, so dysfunction and malfunction would originally appear to mean the same thing, something that functions badly or abnormally or in a defective way. We have dyspepsia. Okay, now you probably don't know what pepsia means. Here's what it looks like in Greek, dyspepsia, and if you look very carefully, you'll see the word Pepsi in there. Pepsi has to do with digestion and going down, from the Greek word pepto, pefto. So you might know Pepto-Bismol or something like that. So in Greek, when you're ordering Pepsi, it almost sounds like you're ordering digestion. Dysostosis. Another dis word, even if we don't know what ostosis is, we know the dis is something negative. Dysmenorrhea. Again, menorrhea, a word we haven't gotten to yet. It's got multiple parts. The rhea means flowing, and you may have seen that before. But what's important again is just the prefix. And if you are a Latin student or a medical student, you're not going to confuse this with dis. If you're a Greek student, you're noting that the dys mirrors that Greek, that delta epsilon sigma. Okay, let's move on. Okay, now let's look at X, and this one comes in two flavors. There's X and then there's EC, EC, and under that is the very closely related XO. There's some confusion here in that X is also a Latin prefix, okay, but the EC and the EXO definitely come from Greek. Okay, so technically all three of these are Greek, but we could remember that X is also used in Latin. And if we think of exit, we'll easily remember that this is out of or away from, and exo means from or toward the outside. So we have words like exodontia. You might recognize dontia like an orthodontist, the one who deals with the upright teeth, or a dentist. Exodontia is a condition where someone's teeth are growing out of their natural spot. They might be growing on the roof of the mouth. They might be growing sideways from the gum. It's a very painful, very rare condition, exodontia. Ectopic, excision. You might recognize the scission or from the verb excise, which has to do with cutting. So what do you do when you excise something? You might be able to figure it out. Eccentric. Ex, which is outside of, right, or away from, and centric means in the middle. So if you're an eccentric person, you're not exactly in the middle with the group. You're out there a little bit. Exocardia. Well, we've already said that exo has to be toward the outside or from, and cardia you might know because it's the word for heart. Maybe something that happens outside of the heart. An exotoxin. Again, the medical terms that you see here are not important right now. What's important is learning the actual prefix. All right, and here we have ecto, which means outside of. It's related to the words that we saw in the previous slide. And we'll get words like ectoderm and ectoplasm and ectostosis. We've seen ostosis before. Ectoplasm might sound very familiar to some of you. Here it is in Greek, just as a reminder that these are Greek words, ektoplasma. So if you're an English speaker trying to learn Greek, it's not going to be very difficult for you to make that jump because the words that you know in English or you're learning as a medical student are already Greek. And ectoplasma, if it doesn't sound familiar, might remind you of the ectoplasm that we encounter in Ghostbusters. And if you want to know more about ectoplasm, it's a very fascinating story. The slime that comes from ghosts, something that predates the movies. And it's also good to remember, those of you who are Greek students, the word ektos, which means aside from. So you might say, I like all kinds of food, ektos, I like all kinds of food aside from. Okay, so it's a very useful adverb to remember. And this might start getting a little confusing. We have ek and ecto and ex and exo, and I told you that these are all related. Why is that? Well, there's a funny thing here in the letter X. X is actually two consonants in one, and X is made up of a K and a S. So if you can remember that an X has a C or a K in it, you'll understand why we have ek and sometimes we have X. And which ones we use depend on the letters that come after them. All right, another easy to confuse set is this here. We have N and M, which means into, in, or within, and we have endo and ento, which are just within. So you'll see these in many, many words like encephalitis. N is in. If you don't know what a cephal is, maybe you've heard of hydrocephaly, megalocephaly, microcephaly, autocephalus. Cephal or kephali is just the head. So enkephali, enkephalon is the brain, something that is in the head. Encephalitis is a type of brain fever. Embolism, embolismos, emphysema, emphysema. And you may know, those of you who are students of Greek might know the word physema or physao, which is I blow air. So emphysema, something that is in the air, in the breathing. Emetropia, endometritis, entoptic. Before the letters B, M, or P, we use ento instead of endo. And I'm not going to go into it in great detail here, but some of you have already learned from me that D and T are actually formed the same way. A D is formed by, if you make the sound d, 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 it's actually formed by putting your tongue behind your teeth and letting your voice box vibrate. D, 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 d. Well, if you do that without using your voice box, you're going to make a T sound. You can whisper ento. You cannot whisper endo. Another useful set is epi or ep, which means upon, over, or above. We have epidermis, epiglottal. Your dermis is your skin. Your glot is your tongue. Epidermis in Greek, epidermis, which is in modern Greek has become epidermida. Eparterial, ephidrosis. Okay, and you can see sometimes we're using the EPI, but before an A or an H, we're using EP. Okay, and there are lots of other words. These are not only used in medicine. We have an epilogue and an epitaph and many other words. So I know there's a lot to take in here. It actually is a small list of words, but there are many things to think about. So what I'd like you to do is memorize the prefixes, look up the words that you don't know. There were probably quite a few in this video. Be ready to add more. See what they look like in Greek if you are learning Greek, and look for recurring words. Here's what I mean by that. Well, we have dysostosis and ectostosis. So, what is the ost? Those letters in red. We've already learned dis and ect. We haven't learned the osis yet. We saw exocardia earlier. And eventually we'll see hemicardia. Well, cardia is going to come up a lot, so that's going to be a word that we should probably learn. We haven't learned hemi yet. That's in the next video. Hydrocephaly, microcephaly, megalocephaly. Well, we should learn the hydros, the micros, and the megalos, which you might know. And cephaly, as I've already told you, is head. These are the recurring words I'm talking about. These things that you see in red are also going to come up over and over and over again. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this. Delos!